Lake Geneva, Wisconsin is a small Midwestern town of about 8,000 people, located 40 miles southwest of Milwaukee and 65 miles northeast of Chicago. With its proximity to these two cities, it's always been a popular resort town, but it also happens to be the birthplace of the single most awesome game of all time, Dungeons and Dragons. Here I am in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and we're glad to be here after 2 years of pandemic. Now we're all back in person in Lake Geneva for GaryCon to honor Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons. We started our adventure the day before the convention at the Geneva Lake Museum, where in the very near future, a permanent exhibit honoring D&D and its co-creator, Gary Gygax, will at long last open, finally giving this amazing game and Gary Gygax some much-deserved love by the city in which it was created.
So this is the first edition of Chainmail, written by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin, which I consider kind of a gateway to fantasy for wargamers. Now, to be clear, first role-playing game is Dave Arneson's Blackmoor. But with the injection of the fantasy elements of Chainmail, it really widened the scope of that game, and then the collaboration of the two men basically created Dungeons and Dragons.
This is Paul Stormberg. He runs an online auction house called The Collector's Trove that specializes in the role-playing game industry. Many of Gary's friends and former colleagues have entrusted him with their personal collections of D&D memorabilia.
I have, through handling their collections, kind of gotten this perspective of this overall history of the game.
In short, he's a D&D archivist. If you need to know something about the history of role-playing games, he's one of the very best. So he's a natural choice to put together this exhibit here at the museum.
So I'm here for GaryCon right now, but I'm also here to kind of give people a preview of what the space is going to look like in the museum to honor Gary Gygax. It's going to be called Legacy of Imagination, and I was given about 3 weeks notice for this, and I reached out to all of my friends. I reached out to Stefan Picorni of Dwarven Forge.
We're flying by the seat of our pants.
Stefan was so generous, and he has come with his assistant Ann Carlton, and they have set up the entire game to run as kind of a demo for the various people who come in and get a preview of the exhibit space.
Generous? Lake Geneva is long overdue for something like this. And to be asked to run these games on the eve of the first GaryCon since the pandemic is an absolute honor. I mean, they asked me to run a game for all the original TSR people, the people that were there in the beginning of this game when it was created, and the Gygax family, the descendants of Gary Gygax who co-created Dungeons and Dragons. They're all gonna be here. Out of all the dungeon masters in the world, I was the one that they asked.
Everybody, welcome to the Geneva Lake Museum. I think that maybe not everybody in this room even knew there was a Geneva Lake Museum, but when this exhibit is put together, everyone will know this museum exists. Roll initiative!
Roll it!
There you go.
Alrighty! But before we get into this game, let's step back a little. Why has it taken almost 50 years to have this game that is so important recognized by the town where it was created? Well, the game has often been thought to be played by a bunch of geeks in a basement. And maybe that's how it began, but Dungeons and Dragons has grown into a worldwide phenomenon and is more popular now than ever before. Since the launch of the game in 1974, Dungeons and Dragons has always had a place in modern culture, but it remained in the margins for decades. But with the dawn of high-speed internet and live streaming games, and thanks to popular shows like Critical Role, Dungeons and Dragons has experienced a non-stop rise in popularity since 2014. And when the pandemic hit, that led to an even larger increase in people playing this awesome game. In 2020, Dungeons & Dragons had its biggest year ever with an increase of 33%.
It comes from Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering. And so those audiences are playing that game 24/7, 12 months a year.
While Gary did not create the game alone, he took a concept first dreamt up by Dave Arneson and created something larger than I think either one of them could have ever dreamed of. Perhaps the game going mainstream has finally moved the town to recognize Gary. Does everyone have a miniature? Please remember which miniature is yours. That's the important part.
We're ready.
Yeah.
All right, we're ready.
And these guys were there in the beginning to help Gary make it all happen.
I'm Alan Hammock. I worked at TSR from 1978 to 1983, and I was one of the editors of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide.
Looks like there's a fire up ahead near the bank of the river.
We need to check this out because only we can prevent forest fires. It was a lot more fun at the early times. When I was hired, I shared not only a desk, but I shared a typewriter with another editor. And when I had to ask Gary a question, I had to walk 2 doors down and say, hey, Gary, what about this? And as the company grew, it became like all corporations and businesses, a little heavy in the management side. So it was a lot more fun at the early times.
Oh my God, as you go around on the other side of the tree, you spot something moving and oh my God, it has many legs. You see that there is a giant ant following her.
Oh my God, boss, there's an ant over here.
These were all former TSR employees, the company that Gary created to first publish Dungeons & Dragons. These legends helped Gary create some of the adventures I played in as a kid, and here I was, running a game for them.
You know, I'm gonna hold the bridge for you, just like in Thermopylae. I'm here on the bridge.
Protecting the bridge.
Nobody will pass.
Not so fast.
Nobody will pass.
Don't do the pass. Don't do the pass. As I stood there, humbly running a game for these legends, my mind turned briefly to a few years earlier, when in 2019, I visited the former home of Gary Gygax with a different legend. This is the home that was the birthplace of the game. The stairs are treacherous.
So I've heard. Apparently I had made my deck save, thankfully.
Watch out for spiders.
Yeah, this is a proper dungeon. My name is Matthew Mercer. I'm a voice actor and the dungeon master for an online real play Dungeons & Dragons series called Critical Role. Our show unexpectedly just began to really find a growing community, and the attention and the support has grown exponentially with each passing year, and it's more inspired so many hundreds of thousands of other people to also get into Dungeons & Dragons and tell their own stories and find their own friends groups. And I owe so much of who I am today to this game, and our show has been kind of a way of giving it the attention we think it deserves.
To go with Matt Mercer to the very spot the game was created felt almost religious, and it gave us a chance to contemplate the impact this game has had on our culture.
Consider like that something that has forged so many people's lives and imaginations and inspired so many kids who now are the lead storytellers in media and film and television and all their facets. Like it all began here is really trippy.
This is like hallowed ground right here, you know? It was really a watershed moment for games, you know? Wow, let's not just play this infantry, but let's get into the heads of the actual soldiers and let's add some fantasy.
Well, before it was all fantasy, before it was all D&D, it was all just, you know, medieval battle recreation.
Dungeons & Dragons is the 7th type of tabletop game created by humanity. We have dice, board games, pen and paper, tiles, card games, miniatures, and then finally the 7th one, role-playing games like D&D. The first 6 types of games are so old, we don't know when, where, or by whom they were even created. And up until the creation of role-playing games, games were always about winning or losing, us versus them. The arrival of role-playing games, or RPGs, represented a paradigm shift, a new way to play a game. And part of what makes this game so special is that we know who created it and where it was created. It was created by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, and it was brought to life in the basement at 330 Center Street in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, in the exact spot where we were standing.
This is the area where so many stories were crafted and told, and dice were rolled and papers were filled out and rules arguments were intensified, and if the spirits could talk, there'd be a lot of argument over rules.
Oh man, can you imagine all those the heated discussions?
Oh, I bet there was a lot of yelling in here at one point. They say in the cold nights of winter you can hear the clacking of plastic dice against wooden tables echoing through the night winds.
Roll again! The traitor has been electrified. You grab the sack of scrolls and you teleport away. That's everyone, that's right? Oh, nice. Woo! Two survivors! Oh man, that was incredible. All these TSR guys who were there at the beginning of the game. And next up is the Gygax clan. Let's see if any of them survive.
Let's go have some fun in the wild woods.
Here.
Here. Right away as you get to this area, you notice something is amiss. And what might they see over there?
Oh, there's like blood on the ground. You can see blood trails if a body were dragged away. There's fire. There's like charred leaves and a charred tree.
Oh my God, as you get even closer to the fire, you thought you heard a sound coming from the banks of the river. There is a booby trap that has been set off, but it doesn't have any blood on it.
But we have some adventuring to do. Off we go. Is that a body?
This has been like a long time in the making. If you grew up around here like I did and you grew up in D&D and everything, it took a while for the town to kind of catch on and for that generation to grow up and for that influence to kind of be recognized, for this to be able to happen. And you got a lot of that going on in town now with the new restaurant that's going to be going up, and everyone's starting to take notice in Hollywood, and it's really nice to just have my dad be recognized for all of this.
For me, it's keeping his spirit alive. It's awesome. I mean, every day I'm constantly reminded with all the new things that are coming up, the new projects, and of course Gary Con.
Just gaming culture.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Period.
You know, it's like, you know, we miss him a lot, but seeing this, you know, it makes it easier that, you know, he's not with us anymore.
And that's what Gary Con is all about. Remembering a great man who invented a great game.
Okay, and everybody, I was gonna wait until the end of the meal, but I'm giving you all some scrolls. It's sort of the Oprah Winfrey thing. You get a scroll, you get a scroll, you get a scroll.
Everybody gets a scroll, and they roll a 30-sided die to see what first level spell.
Can I get one to Albie?
Running these games on the eve of the first in-person GaryCon since the pandemic felt truly special. We'd all been away from each other for almost 3 years, and man, I was beginning to wonder if we'd ever be able to do this again.
You know, it's really wonderful. It's been a hard struggle for a couple years, I think, for a lot of people, and just being able to be back together with friends and see everyone face to face again, and roll dice and laugh and tell stories in person, and yeah, it's totally amazing, is what I'd say. I would love to see something permanent dedicated to my father's legacy, and I think it's about time that this community recognized that, not out of a sense of like ego or anything. It's just he changed the world, and I would like to see him remembered for his accomplishments.